Hey guys, how's it going? So, last video in this first little series on character creation, and that's just kind of an in-depth look at my personal workflow and how I'm actually moving the files from program to program. And I use an OBJ or an FBX. And what I do, let me show you my file structure, is I've actually got my whole pipeline, the way I specifically do it, in lined up by numbers. In my folder structure under the model. So if you actually want to come out to the beginning, I've got my character files. I come in and I've got my specific character, model, rig, texture sets, animation, character props, but we're just talking about the model today, so let's jump in here. So as I said, I'd go high poly concepting, ZBrush, I retopo it, that's a topo gun. I do setup and UV creation inside of Maya. I do textures inside of Painter. I do, if I need to, depending on how complex the model is, if I need to cut down on some of my vertexes, I'll actually do another retopo with less information, and then I will bake the model I've already done down onto the second retopo inside of Designer. And with that, I'll be able to move all the color information from my previous retopoed version down onto my new, less vertex heavy version of the mesh. That's just something that I've come up with that helps me get the detail that I want out of my textures and makes doing textures a little bit easier and make more sense to me. That's an extra step that I haven't seen a lot of other people doing, but I do it, and it helps me out a lot. And then once it's ready, the final files will go into the rig ready, and I will only pull FBX files from the modeling folder if they're in the rig ready. I have certain places that everything goes. If I jump into let's see, retopo topo gun here, this is where all my project files are. So you can see my scenes that I've created, different things, and I do have a mesh in and a mesh out. So these have all my different versions saved, but when I finally have a final version, okay, this is what I'm going to start with, this is what I'm going to send from retopo to setup in Maya, I throw it into my FBX library. So for the main body, what I'm working on, I've got a couple files already here. If I go back into Substance to mess with different things, I will keep all my different files for those versions inside of the texturing folder. But then when I'm done, I'm going to send them back out to the FBX library before I go on to anywhere else. This helps me know this is the one place I keep all my current files. So if I'm working on something consistently over several days and I'm concepting multiple different versions and testing them and I'm not sure whether I'm going to keep it or not, I keep that all inside my concepting folder. All those FBXs are in there. But as soon as I'm saying, okay, good, I'm ready to go on to my retopo, then I'm going to send that master FBX file out to my FBX library, and then from there pull that into my next step in the pipeline. This again just helps me keep everything in one place. So let's just kind of go through some of the pitfalls I found real quick as moving things from one place to another. So I've got my model right here. This is from ZBrush, high poly, it's done. I'm just going to make sure I'm selected on the specific model. I can't see anything else. I'm not going to bring everything else over right now. And I go ahead and I hit an export and I send that to my FBX library because I know, okay, this is it. I am now sending this over to the next section in the pipeline. So, but before, this is just something I do, before I send anything to another program, I like to bring it through Maya first, and I'll show you why. I use Maya, not Blender, but you can use this in any other program. So this is the model fresh out of, actually I changed the origins a little bit so I could make this quicker for you guys, but this is where the model was fresh out of ZBrush. And so when I pull this into the Unreal Engine, the center of the world in Maya is where the origin point of my model is going to be in Unreal Engine. So I can work on this here. I can do all this stuff here. But what's going to happen is that when I bring this into Unreal, by default, his ankles are going to be underground. And I just like to keep that clean and basic. So I just go ahead and I resize this guy to whatever scale I need and make sure that his feet are sitting on the origin and he's already the right size. This can create problems if you then resize this guy here, retopo him, you do all that good stuff, then you go back into ZBrush to start doing his clothes or to do his beard or anything else like that. And then you don't do this step again to make sure that everything's lined up. And it can cause multiple more steps to make sure every single time I got to bring this into Maya, every single time I got to resize where it is on his face. Because of this, I actually bring this FBX after I've gotten him scaled to the right size. I start a new ZBrush file with the model exported out of Maya with the scale. Now, can you do this in ZBrush? You absolutely can do it in ZBrush. I like doing it in Maya. I like creating my assembly or my setup file early so I can see how things are running inside of Maya. And sometimes when you pull things over, you can realize that your mesh is actually in like 3 or 4 different pieces. And so I can go back and I can fix that in Maya. But anyway, that's what I do first. I bring it into Maya, I make sure it's scaled and sized correctly, and then I export it as an FBX right over the other one that I just created, because I still have, you know, the save files in ZBrush, so I'm not losing anything. I keep everything solid there in my FBX folder. In my master folder. So for this one right here, it would have been this resize OBJ here. So this resize OBJ is what I brought into Maya. I fixed everything. I sent the resize OBJ back out to the exact same one. I then loaded this into ZBrush to reset that file. So I don't have to do this step ever again. Everything out of ZBrush now, as long as it's scaled to this, will be scaled correctly for the world. Also with this is the file that I'm going to send over to do retopo. Or you can do retopo straight inside of Maya. As long as you click on the model, make him live, now you can't touch him. And I can go in here and I can start making points and do my retopo. So after I finish my retopo, whether you do it in another program or you do it here, I like to bring it back in because I'll only retopo half of them, then mirror it over. And what that's going to look like is this right here. So if I take my high poly model out, now here I've got my low poly model. At this point, I've been doing everything in OBJs or FBXs, but from here forward with the material information, I'm going to only use FBXs from here on out. And that's because of what the FBX is able to have with it. You can have a lot of materials, you can do groups with it, you can send over lights and connectors. Just from this point forward, FBX is a far superior file format for me to move between the programs. So you don't have to ever use OBJ. OBJ just gets rid of a lot of the history in those early sections. So that works for me. So once I get my low poly model in here, I'm just going to make sure that they're existing in the same space. Because if you were to actually have, let me just make this easier on myself. Because if you were actually to have this for some weird reason not lined up with the model underneath it, so it was like that, when you went to bake this inside whatever baking program you're using, this would not turn out right. They have to be sharing the same world space. So I like to make sure that everything's sharing the same world space. It's all good to go. And then these two models are what's going to be sent over to Substance. One as my low poly, which is the yellow, blue, and red one that you see here, which is just showing me that, okay, I've applied a material to everything, I've UV'd everything. And then the high poly model. While we're in here too, that's a great thing to look at. You can kind of get an idea of the difference between these two models and the cost it's going to be on the game engine. If you look at this guy, every single one of those things is a point. We get in here real close, and that's a super dense, heavy mesh. But if you look at this guy right here, you're looking at way less vertices for it to calculate movement through, and it's going to be easier to deform this correctly. So again, I get everything lined up, sized up, good to go. I am set. Now these two models like this are going to be exported in 2 different files. I typically label this texture or substance after the name, so I know, hey, these are the ones. Those go into my FBX master, and I bring that into my texturing program. Again, 2 separate files, one labeled low poly, one labeled high poly. So when we get over into substance, if you were to not bake, this is what your model is going to look like when you paint it. It's got none of that super pretty detail that you worked so hard on inside ZBrush. It's just your retopoed version of the model. It's smooth. Nothing about this is what you wanted, which is the importance of baking. If you remember back to a couple videos ago, we talked about the chocolate bunny, the tinfoil. That's what we did with the UV unwrapping. You would have done that inside of Maya before you brought it into here, or Blender, or whatever other program that you're using. Once you bring stuff over into here, we want to make sure that we get that high poly definition onto the low poly model. And that's why we made sure that the high poly and the low poly were stacked right on top of each other. And that's why we brought it over in two separate files. So inside Substance Painter, just to quickly show you what's going on, what we're doing here is we're coming over here to texture set settings. So texture set settings, awesome. We're gonna come down here to bake mesh maps and make sure that's not checked. This is what I did to unbake the model real quick so I could show you all what it looks like. We're gonna load in all of our high poly models. Now this model, I did a little bit more than what I've shown you so far. Just for this quick previs check and bake, I actually have his hair and his eyeballs and all that stuff on the same UV space. So those objects had to be in here, but I have them up above his head so I could work on all of them as separate pieces. So bring in all your high poly models, making sure that they're lined up with whatever low poly model you have in your file. And you're going to add those from here. For me, it's really easy because I know, hey, it is all going to be in my FBX master library. So I'm in my FBX library. I'm in my main body. I've already compiled things into my substance. This is where my high poly and low poly assets for baking are going. Come into my high poly assets, and I've got these three right here for the main body. I load all those guys up. I get them in here. I set my settings, and I bake my selected textures. Now I'm going to fast forward through this here in a second, but what you're going to see is you're going to see it going through each of the portions of the model, each of the different broken up into UV materials. So each of those different materials is going to go through them, and each of the maps that it's going to make one by one. So you'll see it flip through its ambient occlusion, its curvature, its position, its world space, its ID, all these different things. If you're not sure what all these things do and whether you need them or not, just make them anyway. If you know exactly what you need and this course is way beneath your knowledge level, don't obviously do whatever you feel like you need to do. And if you have some good advice and tips for this section, go ahead and throw it in. So it looks like I talked forever because I'm long-winded. So we didn't even have to wait for this thing to get done all the way. But yeah, now you can see it's got all that pretty definition on it. All the nice details for the abs and the chest and the eyes. And you can now actually see some of the folds better. But if you still look at the side, you're going to see some of that faceting in there from what it actually is. It's a low poly model. This little divot right here in the bicep from the retopo. And that's the type of thing I'm checking at this point. Is there a section of the model that I missed that I need to fix? That's something I'm going to go back and fix in my retopo before I get into my rig. But yeah, that is the main section. From here, you would export your texture set and then go back and reapply those textures inside of Maya. Make sure that you're not seeing anything weird in there with it. Make sure everything's going on good. And then you're going to start working with your low poly model at Maya, Blender, whatever. You're going to start working with your low poly model on rigging it. So that is my basic workflow. That's how I get everything from one program to the next, to the next, to the next. So hopefully this last couple of videos have been helpful for you, been able to give you kind of a direction if you're learning for the first time, or you know these individual skills, but not really sure when they're supposed to happen. Because I know when I was first learning, everyone was talking about, yeah, you got to make your low poly mesh, you got to bake, you got to get your normal info, and everyone's kind of got different terms and names for it. So hopefully this just illuminated a little bit of the process. The next section we'll be moving to, I'll be continuing this process as I start my parallel pipeline of rigging them and making adjustments and changes. So after I get a little bit further into this, I'll be putting out another series of videos showing you guys some of the things that I found then, any tweaks to this that I've made, and just, yeah, continue to keep y'all informed on the process and share with you guys some of the things I'm learning. All right, y'all have a great one. See ya.